Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. A year ago, on June 12, 2024, an 11-year-old black child was walking with a group of students back to his school after a field trip to a nearby movie theater when a white supremacist named Paul Bittner walked in front of the boy and punched him in the face. After striking the child, Bittner mentioned how the child was speaking to a white person. When police arrived, Bittner was arrested, and he continued to make his racist remarks, ranting, using the N-word, and making references to harming black people. The child this animal had attacked sustained injuries to his face, and at least one of his teeth was fractured. That this was a hate crime was as open and shut as it was disgusting. Prosecutors had asked for $1 million bail in Bittner's case, but the Superior Court Commissioner pro tem, a guy named Daniel McGreevy, decided to set the bail at $500,000 instead. So already this white supremacist was getting the velvet glove treatment, the fix was in. The court decided to dignify the idea that this guy might have mental problems, so they had him evaluated. And apparently whoever the court-appointed shrink was said that this guy had schizophrenia and that he wasn't competent to stand trial. I mean, they just went all out for this guy, saying that he met the criteria for schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, meaning that he experienced symptoms of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. We all know this song and dance is the usual that happens whenever they're dealing with a member of the dominant society who commits a crime. Well, we're not going to say that this guy was in his right mind. Why, there must have been something wrong with him, even if we have to make it up. Well, that was a year ago. What's happened since then? Well, since then, apparently there's been some sort of plea deal that was made naturally, because of course you're not going to take a hate criminal to trial. You only do that if they're black. Otherwise, you make sure that they get whatever plea deal you can hand them. Bittner had been charged with second-degree assault of a child and commission of a hate crime, both of which being felonies. He pleaded guilty to 2 felonies, and as a result, the judge decided that, well, this white supremacist, hasn't he been through enough? So the judge gave him a measly 3 years and a few months. That was not just what the judge thought was appropriate, but apparently this was the plea deal that was handed to the judge. So what that means is this is what the prosecutor had gone along with. This is what the prosecutor basically asked for. So their earlier posturing about $1 million bonds and such, that was just basically for the cameras, because it did cause a hell of a problem for the city leaders in this case. And that being the case, they need to go ahead and get some heat off of themselves. And that's what this was about, a little bit of judicial theater. Now, the obvious is, if this Bittner character had been black, and the child that he had attacked and disfigured had been white, well, not only would this guy have gotten $1 million bond, hell, he would have been held without bond, period. And on top of that, as far as his mental evaluation, they would have said, ain't nothing wrong with him. He's completely and thoroughly sane. This guy could be barking at the moon, and they still would have said, hey, if he's black and he attacked a white child, ain't nothing wrong with him. There's never anything wrong with you if you're black. And meanwhile, if you happen to be the right skin color and you attack a black person, then there's nothing right with you. Society needs to overlook it. Why, the guy just probably wasn't on his meds at the time. This is a mental health issue, certainly not a criminal justice issue, just like they do with meth, just like they do with opioids. Well, we can't treat this as a criminal matter. This is a public health concern, don't you know? And this happened in Washington State. Part of the West Coast. Oh, they're just so liberal out there, don't you know? Yeah, they're so liberal that they never saw a hate crime against a black person that they didn't approve of. This is the entire reason why there must be a specific anti-black hate crime law for us, and it has to have mandatory penalties for it. Why? Because we are the primary victims and targets of hate crimes. Even during all of that hysteria about Stop Asian Hate, while they were sitting there saying, oh, look at all these Asians who have somebody assault them. Meanwhile, even during that era, black people were still the #1 victims of hate crimes. But the media completely and thoroughly ignored that, so did the politicians, so did the pundits. And they instead decided, well, we're going to overlook the #1 victims of hate crimes, and instead we're going to pass legislation for the #3 victims of hate crimes at the moment. Things have improved dramatically for Asians, which they would have regardless once all the COVID-19 nonsense was behind everybody and talk about Chinese labs and viruses getting on the loose. Once that stuff had blown over, of course it was going to go back to normal. And normal would be black people, as usual, the #1 victims of hate crimes, which hadn't changed a bit. That stayed the same no matter what. It completely and thoroughly disgusts and enrages me when black people are being targeted by these white supremacist pieces of trash, and you know that you're going to have everybody from the police to the local politicians to the prosecutors and the judges who are all going to get on code to protect these animals because these are the kind of crimes they want to see happen. They want to create free fire zones, safe spaces for anti-black violence. That's the entire point. These are not oversights. This is them deliberately showing exactly whose side they're on. This incident is a sickening but predictable reminder that when it comes to our personal protection in general and the protection of black children in specific, we had better start taking that seriously, because we can expect no protection or justice from people who are the friends, neighbors, and in many cases family members and supporters of the racist trash who commit these hate crimes. We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power tools, because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. Now, this next part I don't say to be messy, but it's something that I feel has to be said. When it comes to the protection of black children, the family members cannot sit here giving all of this mamby-pamby happy talk. And I'm not trying to judge, in this case, the father of the child. A number of things that the father has said, especially since sentencing, has been inappropriate in the Dr. Claude Anderson sense of the term. The father responded to this lowball sentence by saying that he felt good and he felt as if justice was served and the community was safer. Yeah, a slap on the wrist for an animal who attacked a child in broad daylight. He felt that justice was served and that the community's safer. Safer that this one animal's behind bars for now. But the problem is this acts as a very weak punishment and not much of a deterrent. According to white media reports, the family didn't give a victim impact statement at sentencing. So one has to wonder if they didn't know that the sentencing was taking place or if they chose not to. If it's the latter, then there's no excuse for that. The father is also reported as having said, "There's not a number that we wanted thrown at Bittner," meaning number of years. It was just making sure that ultimately Mr. Bittner, as he called him, and his state of mind were corrected more so than just throwing him in jail. That doesn't solve the problem, so we need to solve the problem at the core. That's what he actually said. Now, if there's one thing that we know about these white supremacists, it's that there is no way that you can rehabilitate a white supremacist. You can't reform a white supremacist. They can only be punished. And here he is talking about correcting people's states of mind. Yeah, let him go ahead and have a visit to the local civil rights museum. He doesn't need imprisonment. What he needs is racial sensitivity training. That's what he needs. That's the way that this guy is talking. The guy even went so far as to say that the families tried to move beyond the incident. They've prioritized the boy's health and, quote, "he's in a great place." He actually said that, apparently. You wouldn't know that it was his own son who was attacked like that, the way that this guy's talking about him. But the father saved the worst for last.
Yeah, my son is doing very well. We have him in therapy right now, and he has some dental work that's being done as well. And outside of that, his spirits are high. Yeah, I really hope that he shares a story of forgiveness, but also a story of how the community has shown up for him specifically, and how he feels safe. My son shares the same sentiment. So we don't hate Mr. Bittner. We hate what he did. And we hope that, the time that he serves, hopefully for what he's done, he will be rehabilitated and that Bellingham will be safer for him.
Did you hear that? Forgiveness? That is the one word that nobody ever uses whenever a black person is accused of harming a white person. When that happens, nobody talks about forgiveness. Instead, they make sure that it is a clear message of whoever this nigger is, he needs to be under the jail. And the judge, he'd be the main one sitting there going, "Oh, this is the worst crime that I've ever seen. Clearly, you are beyond redemption. And we don't want to hear anything about your mental state either. There was nothing wrong with you." It's hard enough as it is to get these white supremacists put behind bars after they attack a black person. But it gets even harder when you got the victims' families out there getting in front of the cameras and basically giving all kinds of wiggle room and signals to the judges and the defense attorneys and the crooked cops and crooked DAs and the white media, basically letting them know that the family is not all that shook up about it, and that, hey, if this guy gets a slap on the wrist, the family's not going to make much noise about it. That's when you make the job of justice impossible. This is the kind of thing that the black media stopped going to the mat for these people about. This is the reason why, for those of you who wonder, why don't we bang the drum? It's because of stuff like this. We got sick and tired of us being out there going hard in the paint for all of these victims of these anti-black hate crimes, only to have the family members of the victims basically undo all of our effort and start cheerleading against justice, start creating wiggle room for the bad guys, minimizing, equivocating, and saying, well, the family's just trying to move on hell. The family should be making it very clear we can't move on until this animal is in a cage for at least a good 15 to 20 years. This animal pleaded guilty to 2 felonies, not 1 but 2 felonies, including the commission of a hate crime. But harming a child, period, that's supposed to have you in jail for at least a good 10 years. And it would if the racial roles had been reversed. In fact, it wouldn't even been a question. This is the reason why a specific anti-black hate crime law is absolutely necessary and why the punishments for it have to be mandatory to prevent things like this from happening. Because you better believe you're going to have a bunch of racist DAs and crooked judges and a bunch of stupid cops trying to do everything that they can to make sure that these hate criminals remain on the streets. The Bittners of this world, they do the dirty work that the cops and the DAs and the judges know that they can't. So that's the reason why they want them on the streets. These are the guys who are the irregular forces of white supremacy. They're the non-uniformed white supremacists who carry out these racial ambushes. And if black adults are apparently too hard to target, then they'll actually gladly go after black children. And since they've got the so-called local law enforcement and the people who are supposed to be punishing them all on the take, all on their side, as far as they're concerned, it's not much of a gamble at all for them to attack a black child. Break a black child's teeth, disfigure the child's face, it doesn't matter. You haven't really committed a crime. They're willing to roll the dice and bet that the judge is not going to give them any time because, hey, they're all on code. And hey, you can always count on those good Christian black folks to start talking the language of forgiveness. And let's move past all this, and can't we all just get along? Odds are, if the past is any indication, whoever the family members of the victim are, they won't be going hard in the paint to actually get justice. They'll start backtracking immediately because they're not expecting much and they're not going to be demanding much either. And that's the lesson that black people, particularly black parents, better take away from all this. If the enemy is making a calculated risk as to what they think the punishment will be, then it's up to black people to make sure that they understand this is not a game. The gamble isn't going to work out their way. And if they do decide to roll the dice, then all bets are off. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Fidel Phillips, James Slade, Suleiman Alaji, Kiko Hayes, and Lorena Peters. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.